Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this special event sponsored by the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara and the Live Oak Unitarian congregation here in Goleta that has provided this facility for us to use. My name is Judy Flattery. I'm the president of the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are 100% volunteer run. We've been around since the mid-1990s. We've got about 120 members. And if you think about the population of this area, that's about one of every 1,000 people in this Santa Barbara Goleta area. So that's pretty good. Marian Shapiro, who is one of our longtime members, who many of you know, and quite the activist here in Santa Barbara. Everybody knows Marian. We're fortunate to have her as one of our members. And she came to us with this idea for this special program. And so we were very, very happy to do what we could to sponsor this, to get the word out, to get education out into the community about this important topic. So I will then turn it over to Marian to introduce the speakers. Thank you.
2 months ago, I heard two of our speakers, Lucille and Jeff, doing a very interesting and educational Democratic Women program about the county's successful efforts at reducing homelessness. I learned a lot, and I thought more people should hear this about their work and get a better understanding of those who are experiencing homelessness. I knew the Humanist Society would be interested, and I thank our president, Judy Flattery, and the board for sponsoring this program. I believe that most people want everybody to be sheltered and be safe. But without more knowledge and experience, it's hard to be an advocate. So I think we need to get educated. Some of the critics I saw on Nextdoor, which I hardly ever read, but they believe that people who are unhoused are either dangerous, irresponsible, mentally ill, or addicted. And many others like us, I hope it's us here, realize that any one of us or a family member of ours could lose a job, could experience depression and anxiety, and not make enough money to pay today's unbelievably high rent. So I hope we're all here because we believe in the golden rule and we want to support treating others the way we would want to be treated. Our first speaker today is California Assembly Member Gregg Hart. As a former city council member, former county supervisor, and now our state assembly member in Sacramento, Gregg Hart has championed the development of supportive housing projects and homelessness intervention programs. He said, solving the homelessness crisis is within our reach if we embrace innovative strategies. He said, I'm proud of our community for coming together to create new dignified housing opportunities for some of our most vulnerable neighbors. Assemblymember Hart has been an advocate for many years, and I'm very pleased that he's here to share with us what he knows about housing and what we can do to help, like sharing correct information when we hear misinformation and letting our friends and neighbors know what good work that's being done. So here is Assemblymember Gregg Hart.
Well, thank you, Marian, for that really kind introduction. And frankly, your introduction, I think, said everything that we're going to say. We're just going to say it longer, because you crystallized the challenge down really well. I think I'll start off by telling a little story that maybe will be funny, I hope. I was at a comedy show a little while ago, and I was sitting in the front row of the event, and the comedian was picking on people as he went down the aisle. And folks were having a great time. And he came to me, and I was nervous, and he asked me, well, what do you do? And I paused and I said, I'm a politician. And he paused and said, that's too easy. And he went on to the next person. So I was relieved, but I thought to myself, that kind of sums up the challenge we have, because politicians have a bad rap. Government has a bad rep. People who are trying to work to help our community have gotten lumped together, in this ideological struggle where people are trying to denigrate truth and facts and science and the things that we should be using to base our decisions on. And I think in the space about serving people who are experiencing homelessness, there are tremendous myths that have taken hold, and it is paralyzing some people from seeing the truth and helping us make the right choices. So I want to quickly, sort of survey some of those myths that are paralyzing us, because I know that Lucille and Jeff have so much content and we're doing such amazing things in our community that it's inspiring to me. The first myth that I think people have is that the folks we see experiencing homelessness come from other places, and they come to California because our weather's great, and our generosity encourages more people to come here. The truth of the matter is, this information is coming from the most recent study from the University of California, San Francisco. They've just done the most significant, I think 3,000 folks were interviewed. The biggest study in three decades, asking what is the story for people who are experiencing homelessness. And the first thing that came out of that is that 90% of the people experiencing homelessness in California come from California. They were previously housed, and now they are homeless in their communities where they were living before. And that 75% of the people experiencing homelessness were unhoused in the very county that they are currently unhoused. So as opposed to the myth, that people are moving all over the place, they're going where there are services, they're coming to California. These are our neighbors, and these are folks who have found themselves experiencing homelessness because of economic circumstances, primarily. Another myth is that people experiencing homelessness are young and able-bodied. That you look out there and you do see some young people who are homeless, and you wonder why. But the fact of the matter is, nearly half of the population of people experiencing homelessness are older than 50 years old. And the largest growing population is that segment that is older than 50 years old. That's true of the demographics of our society, and unfortunately, because of the economics of increasing rents and not increasing incomes, that's becoming a more prevalent problem. Another myth is that people are experiencing homelessness because of drugs and alcohol. The truth is, people are experiencing homelessness because the rent is too high and they find themselves economically stressed. And when they're living on the street, they try to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol to ease that trauma. And in that moment, when they are abusing drugs and alcohol, that can exacerbate mental health issues too. And so what you see is the product of the trauma of living on the street. That's not always the case. There clearly are people who have mental illness that have found themselves economically stressed because it's very difficult to keep a job if you're not getting treated for mental illness. But that is a little understood and very powerful driver of the reality of what you see on the street, is that folks who previously were working, were taking care of themselves, were able to get by, find themselves with an economic shock, are living on a car, then living on the street. I think it's perfectly rational to imagine that trauma would encourage you, to do something to ease that pain. So what are the tools that we have to address what is really a massive statewide problem? And it fundamentally comes down to housing costs are too high, and they have gotten disproportionately out of reach. And this is something that has happened in relatively recent history. This is not always the case. So in 1990, the median household wage in California was $60,000 a year. Here we are, this is 23, so 33 years has advanced. The average median income in California is now $80,000 a year. It's not a big increase from $60,000 to $80,000. Let's track the price of housing. The average price of a home in 1990 was $200,000 for purchase price. 2023 statewide, the average is nearly $800,000. So you can see if the income only went up from $60,000 to $80,000, but the price of housing went from $200,000 to $800,000, that's our problem. And the reason why housing prices have gone up so much is we haven't built enough housing to meet the demand. We have had people coming into California the past 30 years, and we have not been building housing to meet that demand. We need 2.5 million more homes in California to address the backlog of deficit, to equalize the number of people who need homes. And bringing that down to Santa Barbara County, we need 25,000 more homes in Santa Barbara County to address the deficiency. So what are the tools that we have available to solve the problem? I think Lucille and Jeff are going to do a really good job of talking about that. I just want to praise the collaboration the county's doing with Dignity Moves. It is the most innovative, successful thing I have seen in many, many years of public service. I've been doing this work for almost 40 years now, and I really feel like we have turned the corner. We know what we need to do, and we're actually doing it. And I'll leave them to talk about that. You know, we're providing private temporary space to people, which is the game changer. I think in the past, we really relied on shelters. That was our first foray into trying to provide indoor housing for people who are living on the street. And you know, that was important in Bellevue, and we learned a lot of lessons from that. But what we really learned most recently is folks who are living on the street prefer, like us, privacy and a space of their own. And so getting folks in that door is critical. We actually learned this many years ago with the safe parking program, because that was the first time when we said, you know, folks like their car, they like their RV, they like to stay. That is not a hard sell. If we can find a parking place for them to use that's safe and monitored and provide services to them, they'll come, and we'll have waiting lists, and we do. And we're one of the first places in the country to do that on scale, and it's been very successful. But in that interim period, you know, we really became, I think, enamored with shelters, and that was important. But the transition to private individual space has made a huge difference. And you know, we started experimenting during the COVID crisis when the state of California and the governor invested in the Home Key project, which was converting hotels and other spaces like that. We had empty hotels all around the state of California. The state put large sums of money into grants to have communities convert those hotels, and folks flock to those opportunities. And the key is providing services, not just the door and the key, but the services on site. We're trying, I think, as a county to do this regionally now. We're not just focusing on South County, although in South County we have a much larger population than the rest of the county. But you know, countywide, there's about 2,000 people who are unhoused any given night. And in South County, it's about 1,000 of those. So we are doing more on the South County, but we are also doing, for the first time, a lot in North County. And all of the communities in the state are trying to participate in some way or another. The state is committed to this, to investing in this. The governor has really been an advocate. This fiscal year, there's $3.7 billion in the state budget. And that's an ongoing commitment that has been in place for about 3 years now. The total amount of money since 2019 is $17 billion. So this is now a primary focus of the state of California and the state government to empower local governments with the dollars that they need to provide the services and the housing that will make a difference in this area. So I want to conclude by telling a little story. Before COVID, a few years ago, I was traveling in Europe, first time I'd ever gone, and I was going around to the capitals. And it was shocking to me that I did not see people living on the street. And you know, it sort of accumulated over time, and I was thinking, what is wrong or what is different about Europe and California? And I finally went up to a police officer, I think it was in Amsterdam, and said to him, I live in California. You know, I can't go anywhere in any urban city without seeing people living on the street begging for money. Why don't I see that in your country? And he said, well, in our country, we take care of our people. And that stuck with me because it's that simple. We need to have a commitment to say, we're not going to have this be acceptable in our community and in our country. And we know what we need to do. We have the political will. We just need to continue what we're doing and accelerate that. And what you can do is participating in this as neighbors that understand this, that talk to your friends, that talk to your relatives, that explain the facts about what people are seeing, and help them understand the answer is we need to build more housing. And that's not been an easy conversation in our community, I'll be honest with you. It's a political hot button, but if we don't, we will not have anything different. And if we do, we can solve this problem. So I'll leave it at that.
Lucille Boss is our next speaker. Lucille is the Encampment Response Coordinator for the County of Santa Barbara. Her job involves working to connect unsheltered with shelter services and housing, and you'll explain what shelter services are. So Lucille, share what we need to know about people who are experiencing homelessness, what exactly shelter services are, and what you can tell us about the successes that you experience. Are there myths that you can clear up so that we can have correct information to share when we hear myths, and so we can help support programs that are life-saving to so many?
Thank you. Well, I think our assembly member kind of said what we were all going to say, which is wonderful. And when he was a county supervisor, he really witnessed all of our efforts firsthand. His staff worked at our shelters during the COVID-19 emergency response. So he definitely knows firsthand the work that we're doing and the work that is still needed. And we're so grateful to have him now, the state level, really pushing on that political will and meeting with community members to share his personal experiences. I want to share a little bit about what you referenced without saying the word empathy, but that's something that we really need. So I want to share first kind of what, before I worked for the county, before I worked in homeless services, I worked in education and parks and recreation. I didn't have a good understanding of housing needs, of homelessness. I knew that there were needs, but I shared a lot of belief in a lot of the myths that you shared, like they got into drugs or they made poor choices, or I don't know what caused it, but it's probably that person's fault. And I think that's what we hear in the Ed Hat comments. That's what we see on the next door comments, unfortunately. So I want to share what made me realize that I was very, very wrong. A number of years ago, there's a gentleman who was under the Morton Bay Fig down at the train station. And I'd seen him for a while, and somebody in one of my college classes was doing a photography project and had photographed a number of people who were experiencing homelessness and got them to share their stories. And this individual, it turned out that he had the best life. Owned a home, which not many of us can do, owned a home, had a great kid, had a great wife and family and job and everything, and was so proud to send his kid off to college. And just a few weeks into their kid being away at college, they tried drugs for the first time and overdosed and died. And then a couple of weeks later, his wife was just so overcome with guilt, like, did I do something wrong so that he tried this and this happened? And she died by suicide. So for that gentleman, you try going back to work. You try going to a family holiday function. How would you function? And that opened my eyes to realize I know nothing about anybody's stories, and made me want to learn more. And so since then, fast forward a few years, I saw a job opening with the county that was focused on homelessness and affordable housing. And at the time I was working for our community college foundation and interacted with a lot of students and faculty and staff who didn't have access to affordable housing. And many of them were living in their cars or were couch surfing. So I thought, I'll apply to this job. Was hired, fortunately, and I went into the job knowing that I had a little bit of empathy, that I had a little bit of knowledge about maybe what some people's needs were, and understood we need more housing that people can afford. That's kind of how I went into it. But I thought that we needed people to do a better job of coordinating. I didn't realize that all of these homeless service providers, so the shelter teams, the outreach teams, they all meet every single week and talk about all the people who they're serving, and they talk through challenges. I didn't know that had been happening, but it does. So now in my role, I get to participate and actually facilitate those meetings. And we talk through different challenges and barriers every single week. We do that on our regional level. So we have a South County group that meets, we have a Mid-County group that meets, so that's more Lompoc, San Ynez area, and we have a North County group that meets. We typically just talk about, what outreach have you been doing over the past week? Are there any, we call them clients, the people who we're working with, are there any clients who you're really struggling to get housed, obviously, but what's preventing them from being housed? It's usually just the need for more affordable housing. So our assembly member mentioned just the changes and the disparities in income versus rent. So think about what you pay for your mortgage. If you've paid it off, congratulations. But think about what you pay in your monthly mortgage payments or your monthly rent payments. And then think about that compared to what kind of income sources you have. It used to be like on your Social Security check, you could still afford your mortgage or you could still afford your rent. You can't anymore. So right now in our county, fair market rent is about $2,200 for a studio apartment. Yeah. So that has gone up dramatically. When I moved here 20 years ago as a college student, it was $700 for a studio, and that was a good deal. I can't imagine, I couldn't afford $2,200 a month for a studio. I'm very fortunate in that I live in affordable housing. So we need a better understanding of really what the cost is. So again, $2,200 is a lot of money every single month. And that's just for your space to sleep. That may not include your water, your electricity, your gas, your food, your medications, your transportation. So it's really expensive to live, not just here and not just in California, but really everywhere. So that's why we are really dedicated to making more opportunities for shelter, for services, and for housing. So a few things that we're doing along those lines are we are proactive in going after any sort of funding opportunities that come from the state, that come from the federal government, and that come from philanthropy. So we have different models of shelter. We have what we call congregate shelter. And that's what you think of a bunch of cots or a bunch of kind of bunk beds in a large room. That's what we did at the very beginning of COVID-19 when we realized we have a number of people on the streets and we need a safe place for them to sleep. So we opened up the gymnasium at Santa Maria High School and had 90 cots that were 8 feet apart each so that people could socially distance but still have a safe place to sleep at night. So that's congregate shelter. But we, of course, recognized through COVID-19 especially that people really prefer that non-congregate space, just like we all do. So we want the privacy of our door that we can lock at night. We can sleep safely in our own private space. So that's what the county is really dedicated to providing. We know that we have a number of beds or units that are needed based on the number of people who are currently unsheltered. They're sleeping outside in encampments, on benches, moving around each day just to try to find a safe space to rest, really, or just to be. So we're working to provide more of that non-congregate space. So we're fortunate to have tried this actually during COVID-19 in Isla Vista for the first time. So we worked with Pallet Company and got some of those cabins. And we saw that there were so many people who were experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Isla Vista who had just set up shop. So they kind of taken over some of the parks because there wasn't anywhere else for them to go. And we said, this is not safe. Now nobody can enjoy the parks. You don't feel safe here. Families don't feel safe here bringing their kids here. So let's set up another opportunity. So we're able to set up the cabins in the parking lot of the Isla Vista Community Services District community room and move people out of the parks into those cabins. And we had just an incredible success rate because people were able to, again, they had that safe space to sleep. They were able to connect with services. So it wasn't just come on in and do whatever you want in your little cabin. It's, we're going to be seeing you for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we're going to talk about your medical needs. We're going to talk about any behavioral health needs, and we're going to get you into a permanent space where you can stay. So a permanent housing. We're going to get you connected with job training, anything that you need. So that was a really great experiment during COVID-19. And because it was so successful, we had those cabins, but of course the Coastal Commission said, you can't stay here for more than 6 months. So we're able to move the cabins up to the Bridge House Shelter Campus in Lompoc. And they were repainted, so it's now called Rainbow Village. It's a beautiful little community, and it's perfect because on that campus, they have congregate settings. They also have family settings. But for people who don't do well in the congregate setting or maybe aren't part of a family household unit, and they may have some sort of trauma that makes them really uncomfortable in a congregate or open setting, they're able to move into one of those cabins. And they're usually there for a few weeks, a few months until they can get stabilized and move into permanent housing or other opportunities. So we're continuing to use that model, but with slightly different models, which Jeff will talk about. So we have one that's in downtown Santa Barbara, that's Dignity Move Santa Barbara Street. We also have Hope Village opening up in Santa Maria, that's right next to the Betaravia Government Center. And we're also moving into La Posada, that was the former juvenile hall site. You may notice a thread of all of these spaces. They're all on public land. They're all on county parking lots, because we thought that we're doing a good job out in the community of saying, if anybody has a site, any land that we can buy for a deal, any hotels that we can convert, please, we'll buy them, we'll convert them. And we were just hearing crickets. So we said, wait a second. We, as on our board of supervisors, I think you were chair at the time, said, we have our own parking lots. We have our own buildings. let's use those. Especially because we know, like La Posada, for example, the old juvenile hall, that'll eventually be workforce and more affordable housing, but it's going to take us a few years to get there. So in the meantime, we have an empty parking lot. So let's put the cabins there so that people who are right now sleeping unsheltered or in tents 50 yards away, they can move inside and have their basic needs met. So have the roof over their head, and Marian mentioned the shelter services. So again, it's not just the roof over their head, but it's wraparound services. So that's meals, doctor's appointments on site, transportation to doctor's appointments, really whatever they need. We're meeting their basic needs there so that they can stabilize and kind of move to the next step too, which for most of them is going to be permanent housing. So we're focused on the shelter options, whether it's congregate or non-congregate. We're focused on the services. And another thing that we're doing with services that I'm really excited about, we just got a big grant to provide services out in the field. So right now we have outreach teams who are out in the creeks and riverbeds and beaches and along the railroad tracks who are connecting people with housing opportunities. They're building relationships with them, helping them get all their documents together, helping them get jobs if that's needed. But a lot of times we need more intensive services out in the field, especially if somebody's living in the Santa Maria riverbed. It's really hard to, okay, I'll leave all of my belongings and hope that they're all there when I get back. Go find a bus that will take you to the doctor's appointment. I don't know anybody who's been in and out of the doctor's office in 30 minutes, it's usually 2 hours. By the time you're waiting, you're seen, you have follow-up, and then come back. So the person has to be gone for half the day or a whole day, not even knowing if your belongings are going to be safe. So now we'll have outreach teams going out into the waterways. So again, the riverbeds, creeks, and beaches, and we'll have clinicians, we'll have mental health practitioners, we'll have substance use disorder specialists out in the field. So we're continuing to provide those services, whether it's at shelter or whether it's out in the field. But we also continue to provide services when somebody moves into permanent housing. And that's what we especially need. So when we're developing shelters, whether it's kind of the Dignity Moves model or a congregate setting like in a gymnasium or a PATH or rescue mission, what we're doing is buying time. We're buying time so that somebody has a safe place to sleep until we have some affordable housing available to them. So we do still need people to identify sites for permanent housing, whether it's something like the Home Key program. So if there's a hotel or an office building that can be converted, we will take it. But we need to continue to develop those sites. And the county is committed to working with cities and with the housing authorities to find those opportunities and to develop them. And we've been really fortunate in our community. We were able to develop one in Lompoc. So that was the Home Key Studios. It was one of our old, again, county building, one of our old office buildings that wasn't incredibly utilized. And we were able to convert that to, I think it's 15 or 16 units of permanent housing for people who have really behavioral health challenges. So it's permanent supportive housing for people. The county was also able to partner with the city of Goleta and the housing authority of the county of Santa Barbara to turn what was a Super 8 on the corner of Fairview and Hollister into Buena Tierra. So that'll be opening up later this year, and it's several dozen units of permanent supportive housing again, and some are dedicated to our transitional age youth. So young people from between the ages of 17 or 18 and 24 who don't have a safe place to go. Some of them have aged out of foster care or something else has led to them being unhoused. Most of the units are dedicated to folks who are chronically homeless. So the folks you've been seeing in Old Town Goleta or in Isla Vista or by the side of the railroad track, they'll be able to move in to this permanent housing in Goleta. And there are also a number of beds for recuperative care. So that's in partnership with Cottage Health System. So after you have a surgery, if anybody here has ever had a surgery before, you normally have to have a safe space again to sleep and to rest and to care for yourself. So the doctor isn't going to send you back to your tent. So fortunately now we have a limited number of beds in shelter so people can move from the hospital setting into shelter. But then after that, it's, well, just check in with us once a week and we'll figure out your colostomy bag and hope it all works out. It doesn't work out. So they instead will have this more permanent or longer term space for them to rest afterwards. So that's what I mean when I say, shelter with services and housing. We still need the supportive services, wraparound services from the time that you meet somebody and engage with them, all the way to just a shelter stay, but all the way till they're permanently housed. And it may be a few years of therapy or medical treatment until a person can really live on their own as well. But that's what we're trying to do every single day. And the assembly member touched on a couple of things that you can do to continue to support these kind of efforts. So I'll say, if you show up to public comment, that is always appreciated. If you send in public comment, that's always appreciated. We had a lot of folks who were pushing back about some of our projects over the past few months, especially saying, I'm concerned, is this going to be safe in our neighborhood? And we said, well, number one, people are already here. Right now, it's not safe, it's not healthy, it's not structured. We want to move them 50 yards inside so that it is safe and structured and that there's a healthy environment. So bringing educated public comment is always welcome. Identifying sites. Anybody own a hotel that they want to sell us cheap? We're open to it. Something that you can also do if you're considering like your philanthropic giving throughout the year, supporting our different agencies. There are dozens of them that are doing outreach, that are providing shelter, that are providing services when people are moving into housing. So you can give them some flexible funds that they can use to support their operations. But I think the most important thing is just saying hi to people who are unhoused. That's how I make what I call my friends. So, I park in the same spot most days when I go into the office, and I say hi to the same gentleman every day. And that's something that we've heard from people, that a lot of times it's just, well, everybody passes by us and just looks away or pretends that they don't see us. At least smile and nod and acknowledge a human who's in your presence. And if it's somebody who you see regularly, have a conversation with them. And we've seen a lot of community members end up being the ones who advocate for people, because they'll go to the person who they see outside their coffee shop, let's say, and say, okay, I heard about this shelter. Have you heard about this? Or are you on the list? How can we get connected? And they end up being their buddy kind of through the process until they get into shelter, until they get into housing. But that's what we all need. We all need that human interaction just with other kind people. So if you don't have money to give, if you don't have a hotel to donate, then really just say hi to the people who are unhoused in your state.
Our third speaker is Jeff Gaddis. I heard him 2 months ago, and this was one of the things that made me want to have more people get to hear him. He is the Dignity Moves project manager. Dignity Moves has partnered with our county to bring the tiny homes housing project to Santa Barbara. Jeff is a social justice professor who figured out that in order to build a successful program to help end homelessness, he first had to build trust with those who are experiencing homelessness, to know what they need and to honor them as partners. Jeff, will you tell us how you built that trust, why those tiny cabins are so successful, what the wraparound services are, and what each cabin consists of, whether it has a kitchen or a bathroom or showers? So here is Jeff Gaddis.
Everybody, thanks for having me. I think it's important to note, first off, how proud we should all be of this county and the city of Santa Barbara for taking the lead. I think in not only the state, but around the country, what we're doing here is extraordinary. The scaling up of these tiny homes, but not just the tiny homes, the amount of services that Lucille just talked about is something that I didn't think I would see in my lifetime. And I've been working off and on this subject for 40 years, over 40 years. When I say working, it was because I was struggling as well. So I lost 20 years of my own, plus 20 plus years of my own life to what we thought were diagnoses of serious mental illness. And I didn't think I would survive. My family didn't think I would survive past the age of 20. So I got some insight into how to build trust. I survived somehow. At the age of 35, I started to recover. And I'm still trying to understand how that happened. But I can tell you, it was the beginning of me needing to understand how to help other people, because I was finding a way to be here, to not give up. And it was, first of all, purpose. And the purpose was, I found a way to feel safe in the world. because I had never felt safe in probably the age of about 35. What did that mean? Back then it meant psychopathology, right? You were diagnosed with something, a mental illness. That's when they were just starting to do it. I'm 61 years of age, so I grew up with the growth of the mental health industry and the diagnostic process, right? So I started to get all the diagnosis of bipolar, of possibly schizophrenia. That didn't seem right to me. We weren't talking about trauma at that time. We were talking about trauma when it came to complex PTSD and PTSD for soldiers in theaters of war, people who had gone through catastrophic events. But things have changed, and that term is now a part of the common vernacular of our communities and our culture. I used to think it was overdetermined to give the diagnosis of PTSD unless you came from a catastrophic event or you were raised in poverty and violence and or were a soldier coming back from a theater of war. I no longer feel that way. And I think it's for a number of the reasons that the study that was alluded to demonstrated in there. The extraordinary amount of anxiety that we're all feeling. It is not only the people that are unsheltered that are feeling it, we are all feeling it. I teach precarity theory as one of them. I teach late capitalism, neoliberalism, and precarity theory, right? Which has been around for ages. I mean, it's been around forever. But and precarity is the idea of we're on the edge and we're slipping off a cliff. I mean, we feel our culture, we feel our economy, we feel our institutions are not there for us and not supporting us. Our young men and women feel that. I teach college students and they are struggling. Their level of anxiety in those classrooms is like nothing I've ever seen. And they're on the edge, if not unsheltered themselves, right? They don't know how they're going to make it. They're looking at mountain of debts if they do go to college, if they're fortunate enough to do it. So we're all feeling this. But I got that unique insight to hearing voices, to feeling that stress, to feeling that incredible amount of anxiety. And somehow, again, I survived. And then at some point along the way, someone handed me the keys to a group home and said, we want you to manage it. And it was extraordinary for me. So all of a sudden, the patient was now running the institution. As Dr. Ole calls me, here, Ole Berenson called me the infiltrator. So when I walked in that day, I was terrified to be in there because I felt trapped in there. I felt I was still the patient in that space and what it would feel like to live there and be alone and be isolated and not have family, not have anyone. Because my family had to give up on me in order for them to survive and stay intact at one point, right? We all know that. I'm also a former board member at NAMI. So I've sat with many of the families who grieved their family members. And that was a great honor of my life too. But when I went in there, I realized at some point, and I had to realize it fast or it was gonna be really harmful for me to be there if I didn't do this, is I was gonna have to commit to the people that lived there. I was gonna have to fully commit to them and care about them more than they could care about themselves. And that was the turning point in my own recovery. Was caring about others as much, if not more, as you care about yourself as a way of healing yourself, which is how we work. We don't heal in isolation. It's called co-regulation for a reason, right? You can't get to self-regulation if you're not in co-regulation, in community. And that community in that group home, which ended up building a career that I didn't ever see happening for me. There was a young man who was the leader of, there were about 12 young men in that group home. It was a residential treatment facility. And one of the young men came up to me and he said, didn't know my story, didn't know anything about me. He said, they let one of us in here to run the place. I said, well, there it is. And that became the working theory of my life. What did that mean? How did he know? What did he feel? What did he sense? So I went on to get a master's degree in organizational psychology, and I studied structural violence and systemic violence. Not just physical violence, psychological violence, oppression, stigma, because I knew what it felt like to be stigmatized and given up on, and told that I had a diagnosis with no chance of recovery. To feel like your life is over. So anytime you hear someone say the term anosognosia, which is a term meaning the lack of insight, it's a scientific psychological term, there's truth in that, but it doesn't mean they necessarily don't have insight. It's the terror of that diagnosis, meaning it's a life sentence. And you start to build a defense mechanism against believing that that could actually be true, because you want to still have some form of hope. I went on to get a PhD in depth psychology. I did not become a clinician. For me, and this is me speaking as Jeff Gaddis, aside from Dignity Moves and everything else, I felt like becoming a clinician would have been like joining the enemy. I've soon become partners with them, but that's where I was at that time because I was diagnosed and negated and I wasn't being helped. And I wanted to know, why wasn't I being helped? Why wasn't it working? Why wasn't the diagnosis enough? Because I felt like it wasn't landing on something that was happening to me. And subsequently, the people that I was helping. Is I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel like anybody was really listening to what happened to me and why I was the way I was. And it was violence that caused it, right? My trauma, now I know, came from violence at home and throughout my life that I survived. But you negate that. You just got to be tough, get through it. Nobody really listened to that story. When somebody finally listened to me, and I say this all the time to my students and people everywhere, and I believe this with all my heart. It just takes one person to really listen to you and it changes the course of your life. You just need one person to see you for who you really are and what you've been through, and it can change the course of your life. And I have seen that time and time again. That one person that did that for me ended up creating a ripple to where I'm sitting at this table talking about these issues with these amazing people. And we're doing incredible things. But I can talk about the things that have been talked about before, but if I don't talk about what we call the vibe, how it feels to be on that site, because the services and all that are great and they're important and I fight for them every day, but the vibe is the trust. And trust is earned. And how do you earn trust? You have to continually earn it, right? It's not a one-time deal, but it comes from validating another human being's experience, their reality. We talk a lot about people having these big stories where they talk about all the trauma, the pain, and the stories just seem, oh, they're not telling the truth. I don't know what the truth is. The truth is irrelevant in the terms of the way we think about it. What they're having to do is tell a story big enough to match their pain and loss and suffering. That's what we're all doing, right? So if you can hear the loss in the story and not focus on the story, but really feel the pain and the loss of someone, they feel you understanding that. And if you can build programs and places like we did downtown that did that, and I've been doing in group homes and other places. I ran hotel companies, I ran high-rise buildings. I did the same thing there across demographics. It is not mutually exclusive to the unsheltered population, what I'm talking about. I'm talking about all of us. I mean, what I'm doing is to show us something about us by working with our most oppressed, stigmatized population. One of the interesting things about that study, and I read that study, we've been all passing the study that was referenced out because it is extraordinary. It is a gift to all of us because it builds a narrative and a framework for us to talk about this in a really humane way. Is it wasn't just the cost of housing, because the cost of housing alone isn't enough. That's a part of the narrative. It was the keeping up with the cost of living. It was just the extraordinary anxiety and stress of just getting behind. So by the time you hit the streets, you've already been through it. And the fear of that coming at you, if you sit and talk to the people that we serve, and they talk about how it slipped away from them. And I think the thing that makes people afraid about this, one of the components is how close it is to all of us, right? But when you hear that story, man, you can see your own life that happening to you when you really listen to that story. You can, and they'll tell you, man, I had a job, I was rocking, and one thing happened, and another thing happened, and I couldn't keep up with it. I was so grateful that study put that in context, because that's the human part of the story that we got to tell. That's so relative to each of us, right? There's a book called The Furrows written by Namwali Serpell. And it's a book about loss and grief. It's a 12-year-old little girl who watches her little 7-year-old brother die. And she holds him while he takes his last breath. And throughout the book, she changes her story about how he died as she grows. That's how memory and trauma works. But what she was describing all along was the loss of him. So what if we were listening to that story that way? Not so literally, but from a feeling perspective. And there's a line in that book that just, I'm teaching my students, it just, once in a while you'll come up to a phrase or something and it'll just crystallize in such a simple way what every book you ever read or everything you tried to study or your ego or whatever was trying to figure out. And she writes along that book, a line in that book that says, I don't want to tell you what happened. I want to tell you how it felt. And I'm trying to get people to that place. And that's a person who's using substances. Because remember, substance use, you want to hear that again, that line? The phrase? It was, I don't want to tell you what happened. I want to tell you how it felt. In this culture, we negate our feelings. We anesthetize them, right? I've ran sobering centers and built medical assisted treatment teams. I've sat in the middle of the night with substance users, fentanyl, meth users. Never judged one of them because I understood why they were doing it. To the point that was made earlier, when you were out in the streets or when you're going through this trauma and you're feeling that much pain and no one is hearing you, you want to negate it. You want to annihilate it. So how do you get someone back into their body to feel that loss? Because it's so much more powerful to say, I feel terrified, than to try to describe to me and the experience that created it. But just to say that alone is such a healing thing to do. But to get people to do that, you have to get them inside, in our circumstances, from being unsheltered. You have to bring them in. Why is that room so important? Yes, it's important with that lock and that key for your own feeling of safety, for your body coming in, for your belongings, because they've been stolen so many times in an encampment and possibly even a congregate shelter. But most importantly, for you to rest, because all of us are so fortunate to have our own rooms. And where do we go when we need to rest and we need to get away from each other or suffer a little bit? We go into our own room. The gift and the blessing of our own room. That's what I think about all the time. We have that phrase called a window of tolerance. You've heard that concept of the window of tolerance. It's tied to anxiety and moderating anxiety, where you're either in a flight or fight mode because you're incredibly anxious, your nervous system is just fried, you've been under so much stress for so long, or you're in a freeze mode. Well, the center of that is, we're trying to bring you from a flight or fight or freeze mode into a place of comfort and to recalibrate. But we have to do it within a community. So the beauty of these models too is you come in a room, but you're still in a community. You come out of that room and you're dealing with each other. You go back in your room and you have a little bit of time to breathe. Then you come back out and we calibrate. We breathe. And how I've been running these spaces, and I was responsible for the first year of that one downtown. I was responsible for going out with outreach teams and bringing them in and working with Lucille. And Marian heard me talk about how it was unsheltered women that really built that referral system and built what happened there. I went out to unsheltered women on the streets day and night and built trust with them. I earned their trust where they helped me find people to bring inside. We have amazing outreach workers. I want to give them all the credit, but man, I want to give a lot of credit to the unsheltered people of this community who helped me build a referral model. And that's the answer, is recruit them to help us bring them in. But I had to build a place with the help of so many people that they wanted to come into, to stabilize, to feel safe, to start to feel their bodies. Remember, your feeling is your body. I'm getting you back in your body. That's what I'm talking about. I'm getting you to breathe again. I'm getting those feelings to not overwhelm you to the point where you go into flight or fight again or freeze, and to listen to you and to let you stay in that space with us long enough that you feel validated. I tell you, it makes sense to me. You feel, I say this all the time, it makes so much sense to me that you feel the way you do. And a light bulb goes off in their head, and they believe me when I say it. They have to believe it too. That's the beginning. That's how you build that trust, that validation. I don't lecture them. I don't tell them what they did or right or wrong. I have no opinion on that. Who am I to judge anyone? Honestly, who am I to judge anyone? And that there for the grace of God go I. I keep that humble mantra in my head all the time of staying humble. But the way in the end, ultimately, that those sites work is they are run by the community that lives there. If we're going to scale this model, because now I've been tasked with the scalability of this. I'm in LA, I'm still here, helping look at other models up in the Bay Area, looking at building these models with Elizabeth Funk, the CEO of Dignity Moves, and her team now, based on what we did in Santa Barbara. We're only going to scale this model by recruiting the people that live there to help us maintain the spaces. And if we create cultures of care where they really feel validated, where they really feel that they can trust, they will fight for that place. They will hold others accountable and eat themselves to that place, just like we do rule of law, just like we do as communities. It's no different. But it has to be a place that cares about them and values them as human beings. And then it translates to them helping others come in and calibrate, right? And do the same. The last part of this I wanted to talk about was, and how do we do that? We build resident steward models. We have the peer support specialists coming in. There's a big movement that's coming in. I've been tasked with building people with lived experience boards of directors, which will actually come on, and a few of them will be on the boards of directors of major organizations dealing with these issues. It is not about mentorship. That is a power structure. It is about shared decision-making. It is about shared power. It's about listening to the people who are going through this and allowing them to build it what they need. They are telling us what they need. I've never done anything original in my life. I've never had an original thought in my life. The smartest thing I've ever done is just do what people told me needed to happen. I'm like, well, that makes sense. Let's just do that. And this whole thing has been built on that premise. And in the end, what I tell them is I say to them, they'll ask me, I want to do what you're doing. I want to be a part of what you're doing. What are you doing? I said, listen, I'm just building places that I need, that I needed on the worst day of my life. I'm trying to hire people and find people that I needed when I was going through the roughest times and there was nobody there. And that's been my central aim in those places. And we've been able to do that. The services have come in and activated that. But it again is this lived experience component, this movement that's coming up of people with lived experience. They're going to be the ones that are going to help drive the healing in this culture. They're going to come to the table and talk about this in a way. And they're going to prove, as they did in downtown Santa Barbara, that they won't blow the opportunity of giving it. And a culture is created that they could feel a part of and validated by. That they will take advantage of that. That was the task I gave them when the first 34 moved on there. I said, so many people in this community believe you cannot do this, that you're going to blow this. I don't believe that. And if you can do this, you will be responsible for saving thousands of lives. And now they know that they are a part of that story. So when they're watching all these grow and they're watching the work our political establishment and our amazing people in our homeless services divisions are doing, they feel like they're a part of that. And that's a testimony to us and who we are as human beings. And when we empower each other, when we validate each other, when we believe in each other. And that's what I really wanted to bring to the table. To me, that's how trust is earned. Thank you.
So the question is, if we need all this housing and we need all these beds, what's the plan? So a couple of different things. So right now, all of the communities across the state, but in our county as well, are doing their housing element update. So if you have seen that in the news, another opportunity for public comment. So each community is tasked with identifying where additional housing could be built. The state has given them projections based on census data of like, here's how many houses you're gonna need at varying income levels over the next few years. So right now, each community is identifying sites. So that's part of the plan. The other part is the state's really historic investment in developing additional affordable housing units. The trick with that, with programs like Home Key, is we need to have a site identified that can be turned into permanent housing relatively quickly, typically within a few months. So that's what we're doing in kind of the background, I guess, of trying to identify sites. So what the county and the housing authorities are doing is anytime there is a potential site, let's say it's in the city of Santa Barbara, the county says we have a couple $1 million to put into this. The housing authority will apply for the funding, but you as a city, you're going to need to support this with words in the application and with a bit of funding as well. What has unfortunately happened is a lot of the cities have said, not right now, or we're not sure there's the political will, or we're not sure that we have the money. So that's been kind of that has been especially frustrating because we keep identifying these sites, only a handful just in the past few months, but we're still continuing to identify additional sites for permanent affordable housing, and the housing authorities are doing that too. The way that you create additional shelter beds, so we want to end unsheltered homelessness. We don't want anybody on the streets. We want everybody in a safe bed without having to develop 1,000 brand new beds. If let's say we have 500 beds right now, if we develop another 100 affordable housing units, 100 people from those 500 beds can move into permanent housing. So then you've turned over those beds and you've created 100 new shelter beds. So we need all parts of the system to work. We need more affordable housing developed. We do need more shelter beds, but what we can do is at least move people into housing. So the people who are in Dignity Moves right now, so they continue to move into permanent housing right now. The current physical site on Santa Barbara Street, we have for 3 years. So we have for a little more than 2 years. After that, it will develop affordable housing there. So that's really the plan for pretty much all of these sites that the county has identified. So how do you show up and support and make public comment? So you could always write letters. I'd say the nerd in me wants to say, follow every single city council agenda and planning commission agenda. That is kind of how you find out about when projects are going to city council or going to board of supervisors. But there are also other groups like that Shapiro list. Every now and then, you hear about opportunities to make public comment. And if you say, oh, I want to learn more about this, is this something that I would support? You can certainly ask the county supervisors.
Well, Lynn Gibbs is the policy expert for NAMI. And I just saw her yesterday at the parade, and we're going to start working together. She's brilliant, and she follows every move, every regulation, every piece of legislation, where people need to show up. She's constantly putting emails out. I mean, if you're in Lynn Gibbs' email feed, you are being taught. But that idea of someone, and she's from the outside, she's doing it on a voluntary basis too, which is extraordinary. So she's following mental health, care court, every piece of legislation when it comes to mental health issues in the state, where funding is, right? So she's incredible in that way. And I think what she also represents is the educational component of it, is that educating the community. It's a lot. I think if you're interested in mental health issues and you have family members who are struggling with mental health issues and you're an advocate for that, Lynn Gibbs will put you on that list for sure. And I'll get you that information.
A couple of other lists, because I also think the assembly member probably has an idea. I'd say rather than a set list, there are some key people, key advocates around our county who will keep you in the loop. The county has our Continuum of Care e-newsletter that comes out once a month. But I'd say people like Dick Flax, Rob Fredericks, Kathleen Boschke, ask all of them, say, can I be on whatever lists you have? And you get a lot of public comment. Where do you think that comes from, or what lists are helpful?
Well, it occurs to me that sadly, there's not, a million projects to track. There's a handful. And so we can definitely let you know when those projects are coming up for opportunities for public comment. I think all of you are on my email distribution list for my newsletter. If you're not, just give me your card or just tell me your name and I'll put it on the list. And we'll make a point of having every time there's a critical meeting that folks can come and tend to and speak up about and support. We'll put that in the newsletter so you have a heads up of that. One thing I want to talk about one of the greatest success stories that we as a community have had that has fortunately has drifted from its maximum effectiveness was the Housing Authority for the City of Santa Barbara. When the redevelopment agency existed, 10% of all the funds that came to the redevelopment agency were required by state law to be spent on affordable housing. So there was about a 30-year period where money came regularly to the Housing Authority in the city to build affordable housing projects. And they built a lot. In fact, about, I think 12 to 15% of all the rental stock in the city of Santa Barbara was built by the Housing Authority as permanent affordable housing. And that was the glory time of affordable housing construction in the community. It got to the point where the projects weren't even controversial. They were the best looking things in neighborhoods and neighbors welcomed them. That wasn't always the case. At the very beginning, there was a lot of trepidation and people were concerned, but we worked through that because the units were so wonderfully managed and became assets in the community. Unfortunately, there were a lot of abuses of the redevelopment agency law in the state of California, and many local governments were spending dollars to tear down homes, to build auto malls and things like that to generate money. And the legislature looked at that and said, this is not working out like we thought. And so in one of the previous recessions, the governor led the charge to eliminate redevelopment agencies, and ours was disbanded. And with it, that permanent source of local funding to have predictable dollars to build affordable housing is gone. And so the Housing Authority, both at the city level and the county level, continue to persist and do their work, but it's predicated on the availability of state grants, which are inconsistent and competitive. And they're not the kind of money that you can count on. In the past, we would be able to land bank, then we could do the pre-development work that was necessary to get the project ready, and then ladder the construction dollars. And it was regular and systematic. Now it's sporadic and haphazard. And the challenge is, as Lucille and Jeff both said, we can bring folks inside. We know how to do that now by building trust and bringing folks into the cabins and getting their lives, back on track with the services and the sense of community that we're building. But we can't transition them into the next stage unless we're building permanent affordable housing. Obviously, the key in this that is making things different is the cost per key for the cabins is a fraction of what it is for the permanent affordable housing. It's about $50,000 to have a cabin that somebody can live in. It's $700,000 or $800,000 a key to build the permanent supportive housing, and that we don't have an answer as to how to do that cheaper or to do it to scale. The answer is obviously to get back to what we used to have, which was the permanent state funding that came through the redevelopment agencies back to local governments, and it ought to go to all local governments in the state of California. And there ought to be an obligation that they have to spend it as such, but that's an enormous amount of money that's outside of the scale, the conversation, or the moment in time politically to make that happen. What happened is all of the agencies that were giving up those redevelopment tax dollars have now gotten used to getting it back again. and they're not volunteering to say, yes, we'll take money from the schools, we'll take money from the special districts, we'll take money from the county and dedicate it for that purpose. And that's the challenge. My colleague in the state Senate, Monique Limon, has a very interesting, intriguing idea that will tax vacation homes and things like that to generate funds to then dedicate the revenue to affordable housing projects. I don't know that that's sufficient to the scale that we're talking about. This is kind of a marginal thing. And those in themselves are complicated because they're taking units, that should be for people to live in and making them rooms for tourists. So that's sort of the mixed bag. But there's a lot of conversation in Sacramento. It hasn't resolved itself. I'm personally committed. I understand. I think our story is literally one of the best in the state. And so we have an obligation, I think, to tell that story and what we're doing now with Dignity Moves and Good Samaritan Shelter is one of the best in the state. We're on the leading edge, and we need to just bring more people here, show them what we're doing, attract more private philanthropic dollars to do more. And the county is really stepping up with as many dollars as they can to provide the services. That's sort of the model that we've evolved to now, is that the county's using the public dollars to provide the services. Dignity Moves is doing an amazing job raising money privately to help build the cabins. And this is a unique thing that you're seeing, and it's more effective than anything else I've seen in the state.
Listen, I mean, I would tie this into even the NIMBY conversation, right? If I spent my life defending my position, if I spent my life defending my own position, I wouldn't get anything done. And when I hear the NIMBY conversations, we're starting to not use the word NIMBY. I won't use the word NIMBY. I just think it's a resistance to something they don't understand. And I think we need to start changing the language around, like, the fear of what we don't know, right? And the part, because I'm working with the business community too, and I am pro-business. I mean, we have to be. This is the world we're in. I am for the retail quarter of State Street surviving and turning downtown around. And I'm still for the unsheltered. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both things. But I always tell people, and the DA was strongly opposed to us. And then I was standing in the courtroom under oath with Dignity Moves clients, testifying on their behalf to have their charges cleared because they were doing the work that they were asked to do in treatment and all the things. And the DA turned around and me and looked, wow, all of a sudden Dignity Moves is a diversionary space, which was a goal of mine. And now they're saying, wait a minute, they're engaged in treatment. But remember, they didn't want us there. Remember, the business community didn't want us there. And all of a sudden it's quiet and it's the cleanest block on the street. So I could sit there and try to tell you things. That didn't mean anything. I got to show you. So when I was tasked to come back out of retirement to take that on, I was told it has to work. No, and my mom and sister were with me in an event, the opening of it, and someone said that to me. My mom and sister turned to me and said, "No pressure." And I knew what that meant was I had to listen. There's a Morgan Stanley wealth advisor firm right next door to looking at them. They didn't want us there. They thought their employees were going to get harmed in the parking lot. And we had to stay with them on that. And I listened to that. I didn't tell them anything. I didn't try to convince them of anything. I listened to their fears, because what I recognize in this, to the point that I want to make with you, is the only way I can get someone to hear something is show them. Do it. Make it work. So the fact that that is perceived as working look, it's not perfect, nothing is, but the fact that people perceive that as working and not being as awful as they thought it was going to be, law enforcement coming to me and saying, I thought we were going to be here 4 or 5 times a day. I didn't try to convince a cop that he wasn't going to be here 4 or 5 times a day each day, because I didn't know. I'm humble enough to go, I got to prove to him that that's not going to happen. There's been 5, 6 calls to law enforcement since August of last year. 5 of them were hospital related. So now the chief of police and everybody comes to me and goes, wow. I'm like, yeah, I'm stoked on that too. And that's how you change minds. but if they need to see it work, they need to see you work. So I just believe in that model of embodying it, of modeling it. I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just embodying it. I'm modeling it. I'm speaking this way. I'm saying my truth. Look, you have to teach that person who they're telling that to, because we're also in a culture where you say it to the wrong people. You have to be discerning about who you tell the truth to. Not everybody needs to hear it. You got to know who you're talking to, right?
The question is, so what are hands-on things that you can do if you're a crafter, for example? So I'll list a few things that we've seen done at different shelters. Knock on the door and ask, first off, is there something that you're needing? And maybe we can provide that service. But a few examples. So when we had the non-congregate shelter, it was at the Best Western Pepper Tree and on Upper State Street, which nobody knew about it, just like Dignity Move Santa Barbara, because it was quiet and went really well. So that didn't show up on Nextdoor Ed Hat. People moved into permanent housing. But we had Santa Barbara Museum of Art donated coloring books for us and had somebody come in and bring art supplies and teach art. Ethan Bertrand from the Assembly Member's Office brought his guitar in and sang, just provided some basic entertainment. It really is. At Hedges House of Hope in Isla Vista, which also very quiet. It's going really well, so nobody talks about it. But we bought an old sorority house, and that is now interim housing for people in Isla Vista. But an officer from the UC Police Department said, I have some friends moving, they've got an old pool table. Do you want a pool table? And they said yes, and they have worked out so many disagreements over that pool table, just people playing pool, talking through their feelings or issues. People will donate books. Actually, the Santa Barbara Public Library donated books to one of our shelters. What are they doing at Dignity Moves Santa Barbara Street? I know a few things.
Well, let's start with the distinction about building desks. Did you say people built desks? Well, and building shelves and storage units. That's what I'm talking about. Because this stuff that's huge, because what happens is, you can imagine, the furniture in there gets used and broken and damaged, and it's hard to replace. So even people coming and repair existing furniture are coming up with different configurations of storage units in there in those tiny homes, and like bringing that brilliance and that creativity into that space, and coming up with some stuff that would last longer than some of the stuff that we get, which is more IKEA-like. You guys built durable stuff, I'm sure. You know how to build, you know how to build stuff that you can. Well, you could contact either one of us,
and we can put you in touch with any shelter. But tell us if there's a thing that you're passionate about doing, then we'll connect you with the right folks. If you're not sure and you say something with paint, then we can connect you with folks and you can brainstorm. Yeah.
Like storage pieces, benches to sit on. These things get used and worked and have to get, rebuilt. Or I have a guy right now who is over there, has skill saws and is building tables out of, he's finding refurbished wood and he's building tables right now. And he's a former carpenter. I've got an electrician over there, like rewiring things. He was in the union, so, but we have people over there that would work with you who have those skill sets. There's a lot of really skilled labor on these sites who are just waiting to get activated. It would be amazing to partner you with the people there, and they would just jump in and get such a sense of pride in that. That's how you heal right there. I'd love that.
Yeah, so most of the folks, so we look at a few different data points. So we look at folks who are the point in time count. So it's once a year across the country, usually the last 10 days in January. People go out between 5 and 8 a.m. and count every single person who is unsheltered or in a vehicle. If you're not a morning person or around in January, then you may not have heard about it. But it's done by volunteers. So it's hundreds of volunteers who show up at 5 a.m. and go out and count people. If they're sleeping, then they just count them, make an observation. If they're awake, they have a conversation with them and kind of go through a few questions. One of those questions is typically, are you already working with somebody, with an outreach team or shelter, or would you like to? And even sometimes folks are kind of grumpy at 5:30 in the morning. So they may say, nah, here's my name, but no, I don't want anybody. And then we actually look them up in the system. We're like, oh, they are connected with somebody. So we're able to answer that question. So that's one data point that we have, is from that volunteer point in time count. And that's volunteers going like block by block. Later on in the morning, we have outreach teams go through the creek, so volunteers aren't doing that. And then the afternoon, we have youth providers go out around schools. But we compare that to what's in our database. So we have this Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. It's a database where we have the name, the age, the social security number, are they a veteran, what's their veteran status. We have all that information, and there are more people in the database than point in time count. And that's been a big change over the past 10 years. It used to be, we found way more people in the point in time count, like 1,500, but our database only had 1,200. So we knew we're not finding everybody, we're not connecting with everybody. It's now the reverse. We have more people in our database than we're counting during the point in time count in the morning. So that helps us tell that somebody has identified this person, somebody has made a connection with them. Are they getting all the attention and the connection that they need? Probably not. So we fund as much outreach as we can, but there can be some really complex cases. So I'll use that example again of trying to go to the doctor's, going to a doctor appointment. If you've got a case manager who needs to park their car, walk out into the riverbed, help you gather your belongings, take them to the doctor appointment, wait with them, stop by and get some food on the way back, and then take them out to the riverbed, that's one outreach worker spending the full day with that one client. So they're not seeing every single client every day, and that's why we're continuing to pursue funding that can increase the outreach teams. But I think what I was talking about in part was just community members making a connection with people. So you have the people who are paid to do the work, and they do it because they're also passionate about the work. But community members, it's really helpful to say, I saw this guy on the corner, and I'm not sure I've seen him just out there the past couple of weeks, has been sleeping there. Can somebody go out and check on him? And usually one of us gets those emails, and then I connect with the outreach teams and make sure that they are going out to see that person. And that's been, me a few times too. I mentioned, the gentleman who I see when I park my car. And so I asked, I know his first name, I know what he looks like. Can anybody tell me his last name? And then I could look him up in the database to make sure that he was connected with people. So it helps to have those extra advocates, the community members, just making sure that they are indeed connected, and you're building a relationship with them, and that helps them build a relationship with outreach teams as well. If you're not sure, always better safe than sorry. Let us know, especially if you have names or descriptions. But I think you'll also see a change as people move into Buena Tierra, as they move into La Posada. And that's something, I go to visit shelters and permanent housing developments. I'm like, hey, that's where the guy is. I hadn't seen him in a while. So then you may not see them anymore because they're in housing. So how can people in unions or the labor movement help? Employment. So we do have a number of different employment or job training programs. I'll especially give credit to the Santa Barbara Public Library System. They do a great job with providing wraparound services and coaching. The Workforce Development Board and Employment Development Department do as well. But it helps to have people who are actually seeking employees show up and help with the training as well. So if there are unions or labor leaders, they can reach out to us and we can connect them with those existing training programs. But we're regularly saying, like, here's a job fair, and if there's a job fair, we'll have the outreach teams get a van together, go out and get their clients and take them to the job fair.
Typically what's in the cabins is a bed, a desk, storage containers, a chair, like storage places to keep their belongings. It's an 8x8 room, so it's not very big, right? But it's big enough to store enough of their stuff And they have to kind of go through, if they have a lot of stuff before entering, we have to figure out what to do with the other belongings. So they have to be really discerning about what they're going to bring in that room. And we can only provide so much storage in there, right? So it's typically the desk, the chair, the bed. We've moved from desks to, we've asked a lot of the residents what they want, and they said we don't really need the desk. A lot of them, what we would prefer is more of a dresser and storage for their things. Storage is a premium. I think it is for all of us and certainly for them. So they'd like more compartments to put their things in. It's just such a, again, these are these simple things that are very healing, very psychologically, therapeutically, to be able to put your clothes in drawers from, you know, from backpacks and duffel bags, to actually take them to a laundry room and wash them, fold them, and put them in drawers is one of the first things everybody does. There's a laundry room on site. It's a shared laundry facility on site. For us, we do Mission Linen. We have them supply them because it's just easier for us and we can keep up with it. Yeah, and so we separate it out. So the laundry room is just for them and their belongings so that we can really work on, you know, like those activities of daily living, skills of laundry again. And then also it's such a great community builder too, because, you know, I don't do laundry schedules. Like you got to learn how to share a laundry room. Because if I do, I learned a long time ago, if I start putting too many rules up, you just start fighting over the rules. There's a common kitchen as well, but it's not like a commercial kitchen or a kitchen. There's rice cookers, toaster ovens, microwaves on site. And then on that site, we have food delivers. There's a caterer who cooks really healthy meals, who's running a nonprofit. He provides dinners each night, 7 nights a week, that are lovely. And then we have snacks and other food for them as well. Food is another component when people ask me about what they could donate. I mean, food items, because we have a Blackstone grill on that site and we try to provide places they want to cook. A lot of them have been worked in kitchens before. So that's another therapeutic thing, is finally being able to cook. So many of them can't wait to get their own home where they have their own kitchen and they can start cooking their own meals. So that's another component that we try to provide at places for them to be able to cook, and they end up cooking for everybody. They'll do that as well.
Another way that you can also get involved, because you ask what's in the room, and it is the bed, the desk, chair, or storage. But every affordable housing development, every shelter, when they're opening a space, they'll usually have adopt a bed or adopt a room. And you can donate money and somebody will do the shopping for you. That's what I did. My boss took all of our money and she went to Marshall's and went wild and decorated the room. The Santa Barbara City Council adopted one of the rooms at Dignity Moves in downtown Santa Barbara, and they had a blast just decorating the space too. And I think that was a fun thing for people to come in and say, oh, I want the turtle theme room, or I want the sunshine themed room. So that's another way that you can craft some blankets and some pillowcases too.
The ongoingness of bedding, the ongoing need of it beyond that initial room build too is really important, not just from that room itself, but we go through those comforter covers and those covers a lot. So we're trying to build these streams of, you know, donations coming in to offset the use of all of the things going on.
The question was about, what about pets?
Pets, yeah, there are pets on site. There are dogs on site.
So the 3 Ps are partners, possessions, and pets. So a lot of people, if they're in an encampment, they may be with their household. It's with their partner or with another family member. You don't want to separate them if they don't want to be separated, and so you have to live in these 3 rooms far apart. So it's important for people to have their family unit together if that's what they're wanting and needing. Their possessions, we talked about the need for additional storage or maybe off-site storage if there are belongings that they don't need. We all have that garage or that storage unit. Everybody needs that. And then pets. And we're actually working with the county animal services, with a few of the different shelters, and I'm forgetting the name. Is it Care to Pause?
Yeah.
So they work with individuals, whether they're unsheltered or they're actually in shelter, to make sure that they have their registration, their vaccinations, their medical care. So those are things that we always consider their partners, possessions, and pets.
Well, I would say that the women are hidden. They have to hide to protect themselves. They're actually more challenging to bring in because they're afraid to come into shelter spaces of what happens to them. So I mean, they have so many other barriers and so many other challenges, right? And that was a focus for me primarily on the downtown site, was focusing on women as much as possible. And also they're coming into shelter spaces, co-ed shelter spaces, where they've been out there homeless with these men. So building that trust with them to come in and know they're going to be safe. So there are a lot more women that you realize that are out there, and a lot of elderly women, as was noted before. The elderly population is just extraordinary and blowing up.
This year's point in time count showed it was 37% female, 62% male, and 1% transgender or gender non-conforming. So that's just a point in time count.
Probably even more than that.
So the question is maybe why are certain agencies not permitted? Alameda Park, I think, is considered a neighborhood navigation center. So you may want to check in with SB Act. That's the city park. I just go there with my church and serve dinner. So it's been a couple months since I've seen Adam's Angels, but check in with SB Act and they would know it may be true or not, or there may have been some confusion about who is permitted to be there for what services.
He's a great writer. It's a great service he did as Tracy Kidder.
So the question for folks on Zoom was about the book Rough Sleepers. So if you don't do and the author is Tracy Kidder. So it's a study about street medicine in Boston. It's about street medicine, and if you can't do the physical book, it's available via Libby. So that's like your library card for audiobook too.
Let people talk to each other and you can talk to the panel here.
And let's say, first of all, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Marian